the spending, unnecessary spending on
Yes.
subsidies and all that. But then, how can we take care of the stealing?
Well, then you need to send some signals. I'm not saying that don't probe. There'll be some trophy, big ticket items that you have to identify to send a clear example and deterrent for that kind of bad and dysfunctional behavior. Okay, so if you don't bite, nobody's going to take your backing seriously. I agree with that. But you cannot be obsessed with going after every dime and every cent. You know, focus on how to grow the economy and deter bad behavior. Block the leakages, stop the corruption, reduce the inefficiency, and you will see what we are doing. We are spending only 17%, right? In fact, 17% of your expenditure on the budget on capital expenditure, and you're spending 83% on recurrent. What is the recurrent? Debt service. What is the recurrent? Salaries. What's the recurrent? Travel plans. You're running a presidential fleet of, God knows, 15 aircraft and all. All that's total waste and unnecessity.
All right, let's bring in Mr. Adebayo. Mr. Adebayo, bleak pictures from the economic side. But what's your take on the situation right now?
Well, I tend to, I don't think it's bleak. I think is the glass half empty or half full? I think the glass is half full. The Nigerian economy is a very powerful economy. It's robust. It's 530 billion, the largest in Africa. It's very diversified. Oil, we all talk about, is only 15% of our GDP, but brings in about 80 to 90% of our revenues. So we tend to focus so much on oil revenues and not looking to see how we can diversify our revenue base. What I think is important is that over the years, we have not learned to manage the counter-cyclical effects of our revenue stream, the mainstay being oil. So anytime the oil prices drop by 50%, Nigeria seems to be in a crisis. When oil is at $100 a barrel, we're not going to hear any of these stories. So we need to track back a little bit and understand what resources has been available in the last 5 or 6 years to this government. The government has had about 27 trillion naira available to it in the last 5 to 6 years. The question you might need to ask is what have they done with it? But it's not only the federal government you need to ask, because out of that 27 trillion, another 25 trillion was available to all the state governors. What did they also do with their money?
So the accountability level has to start from the bottom
Governor,
up.
local government, and federal government.
But
What have we done? In 2012, Nigeria had 10 trillion in income.
You seem to support the probe.
I'm not talking about what are you probing? You have to understand what you are probing.
But when you talk so much with this level of commitment that how we have to ask how much, but asking is probing it.
Yes, you are probing it. So the question is, you've earned all this income all these years. We are all Nigerians. We've lived in various states. We've seen what all our governments were doing, local, state, at federal. What did the federal government do with its own share of revenue? What did the state government do? What did the local government do? Bismarck was talking earlier about some state governors were not able to pay their salaries. What were they doing when oil was at $100 a barrel? Did they save any money for the rainy day? They didn't. They blew all the excess crude account. The excess crude account at the time was standing at $20 billion.
Okay, we're going to see if this new administration can solve this. But let me shift our focus away from this.
Well, no, please, let me just make one very important point, please, before we go. The challenge we face now is that we have a deficit of about 3 trillion naira that we need to finance. So if the government comes in on Monday, it has to continue. Bismarck referred to this earlier, arrears of salaries and things like that. You need to fund the government. You need to pay your policemen. On Monday morning, when the president gets into office, there's a bill that he has to pay. So government is a continuum. So the government needs to urgently look for 3 trillion naira in deficit financing to support this government for the next 6 months. That's the first thing. If you don't pay the salaries of the policemen or the army, they will go on strike. So no, the sympathy levels will stop when you stop paying the salary. So the priority of this government is to stabilize the government, get the funding right, and right away, immediately from day one, they need to start working on their budget for next year to be able to now incorporate whatever policies or changes that they need to make.
Okay, Mr. Adebayo, let's get back to Mr. Rewane. When you say he's talked about a deficit that needs to be financed, there are those who will be bothered about how do we finance that deficit? I mean, the deficit is almost 80% of the budget.
Okay, now let me differentiate this. What he has described is what we call a funding gap. The deficit is the difference between your revenues and your expenditure. And you fund your deficit by either borrowing, drawing down your savings and all that. But as you speak, your budget for subsidies is 220 billion naira for the year. You have already you've gone beyond that. That means at this time you should have 110 paid. The outstanding on exchange rate differential alone, which has been claimed, is 158. After you've paid 200 and paid another, so you're already 400% more than what was budgeted. So what you are going to do what you are going to see in July is probably a supplementary budget to make appropriations to meet this funding gap. Then at the same time, simultaneously, you prepare for the 2016 budget. And then you now begin to see so if you create ways and means advances, which is another way of printing money, what is the inflationary impact? So first measure is to stabilize the economy. Then consolidate the economy over the next 12 months, and then before you take off. All projections show that by 2016, 2017, Nigeria begins to go back to its usual growth rate of 7, 8, and probably start to get to double-digit growth rates because it will have unlocked all the hidden potential because you have reduced corruption, you've blocked leakages, and then there's great capital formation and new investments. So you reflate the economy. That is what Tilawa is referring to in terms of you must now actually plan, your financial plan must be consistent with your political utterances.
Now, we keep talking about diversifying the economy, and of course, agriculture seems to be the next best option. But then somehow we appear not to have the necessary infrastructure on ground in terms of equipment, in terms of know-how, in terms of probably even skilled manpower to drive this. I mean, if that is going to be an alternative, how long do you think it will take before it starts becoming a viable option to oil?
You're already seeing the results of that. You see, agricultural production index has grown by 7%, where the economy was growing at 5%. The reason why inflation is at 8.7 when you add a devaluation, cumulative devaluation of 27% is because there's some food, and also agricultural commodities have actually declined in price. Like wheat prices have come down by 18%, sugar prices have come down by 16% year to date, and rice prices have actually come down. So when you add declining commodity prices internationally to increase productivity in Nigeria, you find that we have achieved something. If not, this would have been a basket case. So you must give credit to the Nigerian farmers, give credit to some parts of the economy which are still resilient. But what we're saying is that the potential GDP growth rate in Nigeria is 12%, while the real GDP growth rate is down to 4%. There's an 8% difference between potential GDP and real GDP, which means that the economy is constrained. How do you unlock this constraint? Investing in rail infrastructure and road infrastructure. Over 60% of the food products produced in this country are wasted. So you need to move it quickly to the market and also have storage and all that. I think Tilawa will throw a lot more light on some of the projects which he is fully aware of, tomatoes and all that, which I think he will throw some light on that.
So what about the...
we have to go on a quick break, so if you can just do a quick summary of light shedding, then we'll come back and get the details after the break.
Well, clearly, I think we have to understand that agriculture is the mainstay of this economy. It's 22% of our GDP. And the reason why we've sustained ourselves in this country is that a lot of what we eat in this country, we produce locally. And I think the productivity we need to see in the agribusiness